Hello, everyone. My name is Lloyd Stokes, and this is our brand new podcast. This is Effing Hard. This podcast is an idea, a creation that Martin Sutton and I had a few months ago with the view that we wanted to create an opportunity to tell the story of people who have been involved in scaling technology companies primarily, but just being involved in the challenges, the successes, and actually probably just as importantly the pitfalls, I guess, that sometimes occur when trying to scale a business. We hope that it will be a really kind of authentic take and not necessarily an antidote, but there is a lot of content, news, noise out there that really is kind of the high-fiving and backslapping of growing successful businesses. And the reality is that that's part of it, but it's not all of it. So I hope you enjoy. Today, I'm joined by Matt Simpkin. Matt and I have known each other now for a few years, having successfully placed him at a business called Bridebook. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Good stuff. Let's dive straight in. I've already referenced, because I'd like to get a plug in around our kind of ability to do some recruitment occasionally.
You've done well.
Would you mind just giving the audience a bit of kind of background on kind of your career, kind of the moves you've made, and where you are today and what you're doing?
Yeah. Well, let me start with where I am, because you mentioned it. So, I'm the commercial director at Bridebook, and most people will not know who Bridebook is. We are now Europe's #1 wedding planning marketplace and app for couples to use to plan what is a scary kind of thing to do.
Depends who you're marrying.
Yeah, it definitely depends. It definitely does. The other side to that, of course, is that in general you only use us once, not across the board, but quite often. And you placed me here 5 years ago, and I will be honest. When you called me, weddings was not high on my list of places to go. And my background is I have done a number of startups, always in hospitality, but always doing unhealthy things. So I was in one of the first drinks startups where you had to teach pub landlords how to use Wi-Fi, and then, it was a plug-in cable actually, and then they could order alcohol. I was the sales director for Just Eat. I was VP for Europe for a restaurant booking platform, and that's where I saw my background. And then you came a-calling and told me about a $300 billion business of weddings, and I ended up here. And in fairness, you kind of stop and think, well, 95% of people get married. It's a big business. It's bigger than food delivery. It's bigger than taxis, etc. So, you put me into Bridebook right at the very start. No, I don't suppose you remember this. They'd just done this monetization test, which showed a product market fit, and it showed that, well, in fact, I think we got about £8,000 monthly recurring revenue. So we were just beginning on the journey right at the very start. And I came in to build a team and implement a go-to-market strategy for Bridebook. And I'm now 5 years and 1 week into that journey.
Congratulations.
We are now not just in the UK, we're Germany. So we're #1 in UK, #1 in Germany and Ireland. We've launched in France, and we've got more launches to go this year. So it's still exciting times.
Good. Well, it's a success story for you and for us. So, it's nice to have these kind of conversations. That's for sure. Yeah. And so, if I take it back even further, growing up, I always say this, but it's a fact. I never went to school and said I can't wait to run my own recruitment business. And most revenue leaders, sales leaders, marketing leaders also find themselves probably not saying those words when they're at school studying. But what were your interests? What did you want to do when you were younger?
So being brutally honest on it, I would love, and still do. So I am still growing up. So I want to sell cars. That's what I really want to do. And whether that be online, it was when I was growing up, they didn't have We Buy Any Car or things like that. That
Yeah.
kind of thing would have been perfect for me. I love and did used to sell all my mates' cars and take my 10% take rate. And it was
okay.
it was something. I'm passionate about cars, and everyone hates selling cars. If you don't like cars, they hate selling it. So I used to buy my mates' cars and then take my 10% and that was my cut kind of thing. So I'd love to have done that when I grew up. Alas, I didn't manage it, and that's probably
Well, what kind of cars? Is there a particular?
no.
Just
I wouldn't have been excited by selling a mundane model, but I was always really happy to sell exciting cars, nice cars, whether that be BMWs,
yeah,
Porsches,
yeah.
whatever really. But I always enjoyed selling them. So that was always my ambition. I never made it, and I think probably my degree wrecked that for me. As is common, I went and did a degree, and that was in experimental psychology, which
Okay.
again probably still doesn't give you any indication as to why I would be doing what I'm doing now.
No.
It's a funny old degree, but actually, bizarrely, I think it's a brilliant degree for business. It's
Okay.
if I think about some of the stuff that I did, so I did this degree, and part of it is learning a bunch of theoretical models, and I've never been a fan of them, but there are some of these theoretical models that I still use day in, day out. Um, that are applicable in work as they are in everything else. And so it was a pretty good basis for business, I think, on the whole. I will then say I went and became a store manager with Tesco. So I did a graduate training scheme and became a store manager with Tesco before I started doing sales. But there was so much that I learned in that degree. Some of it not relevant, but some. If I think about, and Maslow's theory is one of the things that I
Yeah.
literally use day in, day out.
A hierarchy of needs.
It's
There we
exactly
go.
that. Yeah. Well done.
There we go.
And I always say, whenever I try and take the guys through the sort of theory of it, and I say I'm not a fan of theoretical models because you just got to get on and do it.
Yeah.
But do you know what? That's one of the few things that this kind of thing does stick with you, and you suddenly find yourself using lots of it.
It definitely does, because I mean, where I plucked that from, I don't know, but that's A-level business studies, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure. And in line with that was Hertzberg
Hertzberg,
theory.
yep.
McGregor XY is Hertzberg. I can't remember which one is which, but
You got it the
those
right way
three.
round. Yeah, hygiene factors and motivating factors for Hertzberg. So yeah, you had it the
McGregor
right way round.
XY.
And they are both, and Pavlov's dogs, things like that. They are all really applicable in business. And I realised that these theories were from 1960 or 1940 or something. So it was a while ago, but human
Still.
nature hasn't changed in that time particularly. So yeah.
No, I'm glad I can remember that as well. It's, the point on the car thing, actually, I mean, it's a real side note, but it doesn't matter. It's I interviewed somebody, a candidate, a few weeks ago, who was studying at university and paid for his university education by buying and selling cars.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Tell me about that." And he's like, "Really simple. There's a car auction near where I was studying. I'd go to the car. I had a small amount of capital. I went to the car auction. I knew what I was looking for. I had a bit of kind of knowledge and insight. I bought something. I just refreshed it a bit, just made it look
Yeah.
new,
Yeah.
and I sold it. And I made a nice cut, and I just kept doing it. And it is, in his view, the easiest money he's ever made. He's like, it is not difficult to do or get right. You've just got to put a bit of time in.
Now, in the spirit of this is effing hard, which by the way,
Yeah.
it really isn't or shouldn't be that hard. I can also tell you a couple of instances where it went disastrously wrong. So yes, there were great times where you give a car a polish, you spruce it up a bit, you sell it, and you make 10%. But there were also a couple of occasions where I sold an absolute dud, and my mate probably shouldn't have had me sell it. And I remember one guy literally threatening to beat the living daylights out of me unless I gave the money back. Well, not that I did give him the money back because it's sold as seen, but
but still, yeah, okay, yeah, fine. Who would you say has been the biggest influence on your on your career? Is there one person that stands out, or maybe a number of people?
No, there is one, and he'd be horrified that I name check him. I won't tell him I've done so. It's I don't know whether other people say this, but it was my first kind of real boss in sales. And I suppose, there's lots of business leaders and there's all kinds of people you can follow, but there are some people that just stick with you for weird reasons. And as I say, I was Tesco Sainsbury's, and it was a very hierarchical business, very corporate. And you kind of fit into the right place. And there wasn't much in the way of, they were fantastic at training you, but they weren't the people that were going to leave a lasting impression on you, in my opinion. And my first boss in sales, so I became glamorously entitled, I was the pubs and clubs manager for the south of England for Coors Brewers. And what that meant was I was looking after pubs and clubs, and my regional director is Richard Hodgson. He's now the director of logistics at Allied Bakeries. And that makes it sound as though he's been in corporate world. He's been off, had many businesses, but this is where he finds himself. And what it was with him, he, first of all, he did instill a great sense of fun and a great sense of camaraderie in team. But it was the first day where he said it was a new test where he was giving, what he did, he gave you a region and then said, I don't mind what you do with this. It's your own business. You have to achieve a number on the bottom right-hand side, which was not the way sales was done at the time. But it didn't, your product mix and your revenue per unit, and even down to where you were trading, how you want to trade, and you were allowed to give loans out. It really was a sort of mini business. And he said right at the start, he said, I don't mind what you do. This is you. You have complete autonomy. You have my complete trust. And you have my complete support. And he said, and you get that from day one, it's free. And he said, but the second you don't do things, and the second where you don't show that autonomy, well, I'll have to take it away from you. And where you don't show that integrity, I'll have to take the trust away. And the same goes for sport. And I remember they were sort of easy words, I suppose, but I made some glaring errors in my first 6 months, one of which still gives me nightmares now. And he was true to his word in that I'd done something. It was the wrong thing to have done. I'd done it because it seemed like a really cool idea. It was definitely, why wouldn't I do it? And it turned out to be a stupid decision, I suppose. But he was true to his word. He said, you acted with integrity, you were honest, you've made a mistake, you've come, you told me, and you were trying to do something. And it turned out not to be true. But it has stuck with me in that you can either be paralyzed by not doing things, or you can get out there and try. And, we were in a big business, but he gave us that sort of, integrity, support, honesty, and autonomy. And I think that's probably stuck with me.
It's interesting you say that, because I like I said, we're coming to the end of doing the kind of first chunk of interviews for this initial series, and I kind of went that question. I kind of thought more people would refer back to, especially for senior leaders, would refer back to their first sales leader more often than they maybe have done. Because I definitely do as well. Like the one, I had a couple, but then, and actually one of the people I've interviewed, we used to work together in recruitment, and is a guy called Rob Popham, who I don't suppose he's ever going to listen to this, but he. And maybe what I'm about to say, but might not want to listen to this actually. But he, there was a lot of things that he didn't do right, and actually you probably couldn't get away with nowadays. Let's say that. But one thing that stood, like, absolutely I've stood by, and I know other people who've worked for him, was a mentality that anything was possible. You could, if you believed it, and he really, really believed in this idea that you would come in each day, and what do we think we can achieve today? What could be possible? Who do we want to speak to? What's the opportunity? Let's just go and get it. And I hadn't worked underneath anybody before like that, who had that just attitude of, let's just go for it. Let's just see what happens.
Yeah.
And it was so simple. He'd sometimes just sit there and say to me, right, which 10 companies, who would you love to recruit for? And I was like, well, these are the kind of, this is who I'm targeting at the moment. He's like, right, cool, let's get those 10 companies. Him and I would go into the boardroom, we'd sit next to each other, and he'd be like, right, whose contact details have you got? Let's call them. And we just called 10 people. And his view was, we're going to get a meeting. Out of these 10 calls, we will get a meeting. And I guess, like, I read a thing called rosy retrospective, or read a term called rosy retrospective, which is this psychology thing where, like, everyone looks back at the past with kind of rose tinted glasses. And I think there probably is an element in my mind when we were doing that. We never failed. I'm sure we did occasionally, but in my mind, I'm hanging on to that.
I'm afraid to say the one I remember most. I loaned money to. It was a working men's club in Eastbourne. Now you can imagine this was a dive,
Okay.
and I remember I think we loaned them £30,000, but it may have been more on the basis of the beer they'd buy, and I think they went bankrupt the week after. And we should never have committed to it. It was an unsecured loan as well. And it was probably I don't even know how it was deemed to be a great deal. But, I was honest and I said, I think I've made a dreadful mistake here. And it was, what have you learned? There was nothing more.
Yeah, I love that.
He was brilliant. And I think that sense of fun as well in startups, and, this is effing hard. It really is. But somehow you've got to find a way of having fun. And sometimes that you can lose. It's quite easy to lose that bit, let's be honest. But if you do lose that bit, given how effing hard it is, you've really got to find a way to bring it back.
It's such a good, it's such a good point. That it is hard sometimes, of course it is, but it makes a lot of sense. In line with the title, I have to ask you this question because it's at the crux of kind of why we set the podcast up. If you look at the companies that you've worked in, you might just want to focus on Bridebook, or maybe there's a trend. Is there a stage of growth that you've seen which you think is particularly harder than others?
Yes, I'll caveat it by saying there's lots of stages that are really difficult. And I suppose all of the normal stuff that, does form so much difficulty, they're keeping the culture and as you scale, et cetera. But I think the hardest bit for me has been in that internationalization in Bridebook. And our first or our second country, so we were UK based and we went over to Germany. And I think you go with lots of planning. We planned a lot. We had a great playbook built, and we'd done a lot of tests. So we'd taken a German speaker into the UK, and we'd proven the product market fit. And therefore, it was just like, well, this really is. We're just rolling it out. It's going. And then you realise that there are so many questions that there isn't one right answer to it, but everyone has an interest in telling you a different answer. And I think back to, okay, so now we've got our one person in the UK, but we're going to have to scale the sales team, and we're going to have to put terms and conditions into German, and we're going to have to think about, do we need an entity or don't we need an entity, and all of that kind of stuff. And even down to, the way you've set your finance systems up. And you realise then that all of your playbook doesn't necessarily cover the circumstances. So we reached out to so many experts, where I think about even the terms and conditions. We spent, I won't say how much, but we spent so much trying to get personalised terms and conditions for each market. We didn't need to do that, but some expert told us that's what we needed. We went out to various outsourced sales companies to look at, and I bet we talked to you about it. I'm sure we would have done. And, there was you probably want to outsource your sales because otherwise are you going to need an entity over there and so on. And we tested all of this stuff. And if I'm honest, I look back on it and just think, well, we probably talked to someone who was running an outsourced sales company, and lo and behold, that was the right solution to them. And everything that you had in place, some of it still stood. The product market fit still stood, but you're tasked with so many questions around, well, it's different in Germany. The people that you're recruiting are going to be different in Germany. The customers you're going to sell it to are going to be different. And everyone has an angle, was the way I look back on it now. And maybe that's a bit cynical of me. What I think I have learned is probably that you've got to be fairly pragmatic when you go into a new market. And we were much more so when we went into France, and we've got 2 new markets coming up. And where those nerves, where people are asking me questions about, well, do our GDPR rules still apply in the same way or whatever? Actually, I can take a slightly more pragmatic view, not to GDPR, obviously. So, I am saying that, but you have to take a more pragmatic view. You can have a brilliant playbook, and it can be phenomenally successful, but it isn't always going to work, and there are always going to be a lot of different opinions about ways of doing things. And so for me, that was really challenging. And it didn't go, it's not like I'd love to say, and then what we did is we launched the sales team in Germany and they flew, and from day one, it was brilliant. It took a little while. And thankfully now we are in the best place. And actually, I think where we did strike lucky was after about 6 months of testing a whole lot of stuff, we found a fantastic country manager, and he's really brought that team on. But I think that was a really difficult stage for us. And it's a bump, and you don't know how long the bump's going to go on for. And I'm sure your other attendees talked about bumps. You have a bump, and it's okay to have a bump. That's what you're supposed to do. And what you do then is you break it all, you put it back together again, and the bump might be a week, or it might be a month, or it might be 6 months, but you've really no idea how long the bump's going to be. COVID was a bump that should have lasted a month, and weddings were banned for a year, or my first year. So, that's a bump that went on for longer.
Yeah, so, obviously, for many reasons, remember that well. Is that the growing internationally has been a topic that I've spoken to a lot of people with over the last kind of couple of years. Actually, probably longer than that. More my experience has been UK businesses looking to maybe launch in the US, and just the numerous challenges of doing it. Everyone always focuses on the obvious, which is that the fact that the salaries are certainly in sales are just so much higher, and that's always a shock to anyone who's ever looking to do it. But there's a multitude of challenges in doing that, and the flip actually as well of US companies launching in the UK. And I do think central to it, I mean, and you alluded to it, is you've got a strong view on this now, is that you must find somebody senior enough who can own that territory for you and has experience of doing that, and who is really supported to do that. Because if you think you're going to bring that person and leave them as a lone wolf to try and build something, I just continually see that as not work.
Yeah, I think, I was fortunate. I got a network in the countries I went into, and this guy I'd known for a while.
Yeah,
I think I would have been very challenged to making that first recruit is such a hard hire, because you've got to have experience of doing it before. I'm really confident that's really important. Without it, it's going to be a really hard fight, because the people in the new markets, they are much more on their own. They've got different challenges. So it was definitely difficult. And I'm also really aware that this is effing hard. I now have a playbook for internationalization, but I need to be honest. And one of the markets, I can't go into detail, but both of the markets are different time zones. And I think, well, okay, it doesn't matter. We'll be fine. We'll work it out. But then when you actually start putting it on paper and look at, the intersection, even just to do your product testing, you've got a couple of hours at the end of the day and a couple of hours at the start of the day, depends on the time zones. And that presents a whole bunch of different challenges again, which you're in a scale up until you're not in a scale up, and we're definitely in a scale up still. And we've definitely got to break it all again. And it's going to be exciting, and it's really great to launch outside of Europe, etc. But we've still not got
it. No, I get it. I definitely get it. What, to flip it slightly, rather than success is also a big factor and a big draw for people wanting to get into early stage businesses and seeing. I think probably the draw for a lot of people is being able to be much closer to the action and being able to try and test things to see what works and being given a bit more of that autonomy that we talked about, that flexibility. A bribe book, is there a thing that you've done, and maybe before that as well, it doesn't necessarily need to be specific to bribe book, but is there a sales lever is the term that I use, something where you've gone, let's try that, I think that could be a really successful revenue driver, or not necessarily revenue, just driver of growth overall, that's really landed well?
Yeah, there's also probably so there's definitely that. There's probably more
And the flip
sales.
side,
There's probably more sales levers that didn't work.
give me both.
Well, yeah, and I suppose probably some of the levers are positives and negatives, and people is probably the biggest one, and one I'll give as an example of both. In that I've tried in numerous organisations, and probably with you as well, to understand who's going to be successful, what's the experience, and we've tried educational levels, we've tried experience, we've tried backgrounds, we've tried psychometric testing. I think at some point we've tried so much stuff, and I've done that in Just Eat as well. We had a sales team in Just Eat for 100 people, and we did so much analysis on who's going to be the most successful salesperson. And I think we've tried so many of those where you think, well, we're going to identify this and then we're going to churn them out in a robotic AI fashion. And I don't think we've ever, well, I know I've never found that correlation. What I have found is that a similarity between the sort of selling person, or a relatability between the salesperson and the places that you're selling, is probably the best lever, and therefore searching for those kind of people. And if I think about our most successful account managers or salespeople or whatever, they do very often have those similar traits in terms of their personality and their relatability. They don't have to be the same. And, in the case of wedding venues, very often they're stately homes owned by a generation above myself, and their family homes, and they are custodians of it. And therefore, I'm not going to find it very easy to recruit, upper class elitist people in their 80s. But nevertheless, if you can find someone who can be,
there's an untapped talent pool.
Well, maybe that's what they do need. They need money to keep these houses up and running. So maybe that is the thing. But actually, where I think about the successful people, they are relatable because there's something that they can see in this salesperson that they admire, and that there has to be that level of admiration. My best salespeople now would be those people who are either can relate because they are similar to, or they have some kind of a passion for that sort of talking to those people. And probably the most successful one, actually, I can see that they would see him as their grandson because of the way he talks. And so I guess, it's a bit of a weird one saying people. I would love to find a better formula for it, because it's very hard to assess in an interview. But I think it does make the world of difference. And there's so many other levers that we try, and some work and some don't, and promotions, etc. But I think people's the one that just keeps coming up, and we keep having to review it, because again, the people that you want at the start of the business are very different to the people that I want now, and therefore you continually reviewing it with your country managers.
People is a common theme. I can give that unique bit of insight for sure. More so than I expected, actually. I mean, it really no, it is more so than I expected. But for obvious reasons. What's there's a lot going on in sales at the moment. There's a lot of change. AI is the obvious thing to talk about. Of course, everyone's looking at AI, working out how they can use AI, implementing it. The number of products that suddenly apparently are AI tools that you can look at. But if I'm honest, there are elements of what's happening in AI that give me, I wouldn't say sleepless nights, but they leave me to think for longer around kind of where does our industry, where does recruitment, how does that get impacted, and what does it mean for maybe not even the long term, the midterm, but is there is there stuff going on in your world now that you can see over the next 12 months is going to lead to you, as I say, not necessarily having a sleepless night, but just is on your mind, making you think a bit more around kind of what's going on in the world today?
I mean, I watched an episode of Black Mirror, and that gave me sleepless nights. It's don't watch it if AI is giving you sleepless nights and the future. Don't watch Black Mirror.
Okay.
But I do think AI is worth talking to about, in the sense that I have an opinion that there's a lot of companies talking about AI and how their tool is AI. I am not an expert in AI, so my job is to find the best experts out there. And some of those have revolutionized the way we do our job. And I don't want to do a shameless plug for Gong because I don't get anything out of it, but they've changed the way we operate. All of the listening to calls and all of the coaching and all, I can instantly know. We've just done a fantastic product release. I'm plugging Biped now. We've just done a fantastic product release, and I know within 24 hours what's being talked about and whether it's being well received or not. And in the olden days, you couldn't get to that. So I do think there are great tools out there. I think the challenge is selecting the right tool. And I also think there's I think selecting the right person that is running this area for you is incredibly important. And I have changed my opinion on that over the course of the last 5 years. My head of sales ops is, at the moment, he's doing a project where he's taking every single data source. We are so data rich. We have literally hundreds of thousands of couples using our app, and therefore we know everything about every wedding. We know everything about every venue. We know all there is to know about every piece of marketing, every piece of geography knowledge, etc. And the problem is putting that into one place. And actually, I'm sure there are different ways of doing this, but actually having an understanding of how you use the AI tools to present that information, and just having the right person who can deliver. There's been automated presentations for 10 years probably, but I don't think we've ever been at a stage where going into a call 5 minutes before, you can present them with every single piece of information that allows them to have success in that call. Because no matter what they're talking about, they're going to talk. They can talk about the exact couples, the competition, the kind of spend for a couple in that area, and I do think that is it is revolutionizing things. And I think by keeping some of that within our remit, we keep a level of control. Where we're talking about, the technology behind, Gong as the example, I don't want to be doing that. That's not where I'm an expert. And, when I look at some of I'm not there yet on the sort of AI salespeople. I've seen what's out there, and I'm not there yet on it. I'm really happy to be convinced, but I'm not there yet on it.
No, I've seen and heard conflicting information news stories about that too. So no,
and look at, I'll watch the podcast and see whether anyone suggests any great stuff. Because again, that's part of it, is staying at pace is really difficult. Because my job is wide enough and diverse enough without me having to be an expert on the way technology is going. And, if I think of our CTO, it's the same him. His job at least is partly to think about how we integrate that into our product. It's a challenging time. The pace is quick.
I think it is, isn't it? I was thinking that then, and thinking actually so much of the conversation in this podcast has been around the kind of the business challenges of scaling. But actually, if I think about the role responsibilities, the challenge for a revenue leader to be on top of what's happening, changing, moving. Because someone said this to me a while ago, in that if you are a sales leader today and you think you can go into a business and just replicate the playbook that you've done for the last 10, 15 years in companies and it's going to work, you're going to get found out really quickly. And so actually what's really effing hard for revenue leaders now, I think, is to make sure that like I say, you don't need to be an expert, but you need to make sure that you're constantly evolving. quickly as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is one of the challenges. Is people always, as you say, they talk about salespeople. You know, what's the great salespeople? What's the great account manager? Or your B2B marketing, all of the traditional stuff. In truth, the most important role is that sort of person who's going to support you in the operation side. And in the olden days, you know, they'd have implemented Salesforce, and that would have been the job done for the next 10 years. And nowadays, that's not the case. So
It's yeah. I mean, RevOps as a function, I would say, is probably the most highly one of the most highly prized roles. I don't know if that's the right explain that correctly, but what I mean by that is that I see a lot more early stage businesses making that hire a lot earlier on and actually um, paying well for that person and prioritizing bringing in somebody who's really got great experience.
yeah, and that is a big learning in this business. I think I would have done differently. We took a junior sales ops, thinking, well, you know, what do we need? We need, and I remember all we ever talked about for the first 6 months, and I totally understand why. Is we talked about, you know, who's selling, and you know, when's that hockey stick going upwards, you know, and every week, every not every day, but every week it was, you know, when's the hockey stick coming and what's the sales look like? No founder has ever once asked me about the stuff that makes it happen. And looking back, I would have taken a much higher skilled sales ops person. The guy I've got now is absolutely fantastic, and he's passionate about moving the sort of the stuff behind the scenes forward, and he likes shiny new things. He likes exploring things, and in retrospect, that would be, you know, that would be something that I hired far earlier on, because without that role, you can build as much sales as you want, but ultimately, unless you've got right systems underneath, the right processes, someone's measuring it, monitoring it, moving you forward, it's all artificial. Anyone can put a sales graph that goes up because, you know, you put the right people in it with the right ambition, and they'll probably sell as long as you've got a half decent product. But it'll break at some point,
Yeah.
whether that be 3 years down the line when you internationalize, or whether you go national, or whatever it is. But at some point, it'll break without that role.
I don't think you're alone in that. Maybe realization over the last few years. It's a common theme.
Yeah.
What do you do? There's a lot of pressure involved in having a role and the responsibility that you do in a business like Thrive, but scaling and moving at the pace that it does. What's your secret to keeping some degree of sanity? What do you do to keep things
Wine.
on a level? Wine. Yeah, but, yeah.
Okay, you wanted something more constructive than that.
Well, not necessarily. No, I mean,
yeah.
we've had a drink together before, Matt. I know
we
that's
have,
true.
yeah, we have wine. Yeah, I look. It's about balance for me and my family. Ultimately, is it? In fact, this came back to my time at Tesco. One of the things I learned that they had a phrase. It was "be here now," and all it meant. I mean, it's a really simple phrase, but it was really quite important. And it meant wherever you are, be there. So if you're at home and you're not working, then that's what you're doing. You're spending time with your family. And if you're at work, then you're at work. And if you're doing a one-to-one or a skip level meeting or whatever it is, be in that meeting. Don't be, and it's very easy not to be. And I'm not going to say I'm a model at it, because there are times where that, you know, you've got all kinds of stuff happening, and yet you've got a half-hour meeting in that is important to this person. And remembering that be here now is really important. And I think back to in one of the businesses we were in, we sold to a Japanese business, a big PLC, and we flew over to Japan and presented our business plan. And we had the very top guy of a big PLC listening to our plans. And at the end of the meeting, he told us how much he'd concentrated, because it came up on a computer screen. And they'd got these glasses that measured his eye activity. And he told us he'd been 42% concentrating on what we were saying in that meeting. And he said that was pretty good. And actually 42%, that is pretty good. I mean, I don't know whether we were flattered or not. I do remember we'd been out the night before, and therefore we were astounded we had it at 42% of his time, really. But I do think that if we look at what that's about, in all honesty, it's just about being here now. And, that's I'm just as good at that at home as I am at work. And so, yeah, for me, family, time in the garden, time on the beach. I'm fortunate to live down on the south coast, and I'm happy to commute up to London, but I'm very happy being down here.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. Last question before we wrap things up today is, and the question that we always ask, it's the last question in the interview, is there a piece of advice? And I don't mind if the answer is actually towards founders or towards people who are either in your role currently or looking to move into a role with your level of responsibility. And there's a lot we've already covered, I know, so it might be hard to pick out one thing, but is there a piece of advice that you'd like to share that you think has been invaluable for you and would actually benefit others?
Yeah, I think I will go back to one of the previous answers, and my current founder, or in fact, he's still the founder. My current founder, full of energy, fantastic guy, and we've worked well together for 5 years. He, as with most founders, what he's excited by is the line and the sense of community that he's delivering, and the relationships we're building with the venues that we partner with, etc. And that's where most, I would say 95% of our time would have been spent chatting in our one-to-ones, etc. If I look back, and therefore if I think about founders, it was the same in my previous business, probably not so in Just Eat. It was this bit around put the building blocks in place, and that should be all you talk about at first. I do remember when I took this job, the first thing we did was use you guys to build as a sales team. And that was 50% of the job at first. And it was probably all we talked about, myself and the founder. And when I think back to the first board meetings and our investors, again, what they want to know is, how's the sales line going? And of course, that's natural. Fundamentally, probably more important than any of that is what's the plan underneath? What's the building blocks? Because you can, if you haven't got a CRM system that's scalable across all of the markets, if you haven't built the invoicing platform right, and by the way, we didn't, we made mistakes on the way, which is what you do. But without having that RevOps, as the term is now, without having that role in place, you'll be causing challenges later. So spend more time at least asking those questions. It's not a very sexy part of the business, and in the end, that's what I'm paid for. But make sure you ask that question, because those are the things that will break first.
I think that that point is, having placed a number of people into roles that you're one of those examples, but other people into similar roles. Often with first-time founders, there is a feeling sometimes, I think, from it, more so first-time founders, who once they get that sales lead, senior, is okay, I've got that person now. That's to sell. Why aren't we selling? Why aren't we selling? And there's an impatience there, I think, to drive the number. And I get it, because there are lots of different factors that influence that. And there's excitement around kind of getting customers on board and seeing the revenue growth line. But I think it requires, certainly the people that I've learned this from, and you're another example of that, is just having the ability to be able to, when you, probably even before you join the business, going through that hiring process and interviewing, to be able to manage the expectations of that founder when you join, to say, look, let's just be really aligned on what the first 3 to 6 months look like, and having the confidence. And do you know what? Maybe occasionally that means you walk away from an opportunity if you are looking, because you don't get that alignment. Because I've definitely seen it not work out, where 6 months down the line, someone's turning around to me saying, actually, do you know what? They really don't have product market fit. There is no real value prop. There's a lot more work that needs to be done here. There's nothing to sell that. Yeah. In essence, there's nothing to sell. So it's hard to get the balance right, though.
It definitely is. Yeah.
Matt, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
That's been 40 minutes, incredibly well spent, and really a really interesting take. I mean, we didn't even get the chance to delve that much into kind of the experience of Just Eat, which I know you alluded to. Running a team of 100 salespeople is not many people have done that or are doing that. That's for sure. So, but there's a lot there for founders, both current senior revenue leaders, but also I think people who are looking to make that transition or maybe get into the kind of role and responsibility that you have now. So, thank you. That's been excellent.
Pleasure. Good to see you again, Lloyd.
Thank you, Matt.